Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Horse Advocate Podcast. Thank you for being patient with me as I've taken a couple of weeks off for a couple of reasons. The first is I had a tooth infection. Yes, an equine dentist with a tooth infection. And it was from a broken tooth I'd had and finally invaded the nerve. And it was extremely painful. And I had to have a root canal. And it took a week and 2 weeks, actually. So I was a little distracted. But more importantly, my wife and I celebrated our 45th wedding anniversary. And as a treat, my son came home from the other side of the world over in Indonesia to come visit with us for 2 months. That took up our time. So I'm sure you all will just cut me a little bit of slack for not being around with you. Sometimes personal lives get in the mix of things. I know I just went to see a client I hadn't seen in 18 months. And that's because she had broken leg, secondary to breast cancer that she'd been suffering through, she's working through. And sometimes life gets in the way. So with that out of the way, maybe you didn't even need to know that. Maybe you didn't even miss me. You're so busy with your own lives. I get it. But here I am back in the Tesla, charging as I'm heading off to take care of some horses over in Louisiana. And I got a text with a link to a Bill Maher diatribe. Bill Maher has a TV show where he talks about multiple things. And I don't listen to him much, but this is all about the obesity epidemic. And he said that it's now fat acceptance, whereas before, we just talked about fat. We didn't want to fat shame anybody. We didn't talk about how somebody was fat. And now we're just actually elevating it to being, this is really cool now that you're fat. And it was a satirical presentation that made me think about how we think about our horses, because we know that a lot of our horses are overweight. And I decided to look up the most reliable indicator of metabolic syndrome in humans. That is either the waist circumference or the waist to hip ratio. And it's interesting because the waist is basically around your belly button if you measure it. And according to the experts, I'm reading this down here, the waist circumference is greater than or equal to 94 centimeters in men. So I had to go over and double check and make sure I knew what 94 centimeters was. And I'm converting it, it's 37 and 1/64 inch. So if your waist is greater than 37 inches or equal to 37 inches, there's a good chance that you have one of 5 indicators of metabolic syndrome in humans. The other indicators are insulin resistance, blood lipids, blood pressure, and your blood glucose. Now, I know you women listening to this want to know what it is for women, and it's 80 centimeters. And for those who aren't into that, that's 31 and a half inches waist circumference. So if you have a waist circumference greater than 31 and a half inches, and you have insulin resistance or lipids in your blood, etc., you probably are getting metabolic syndrome. The other measurement is the waist to hip ratio, and in men, it's greater than 0.9. So basically, your hips and your waist should be about equal. In women, you're allowed to have larger hips. It's greater than 0.85. So those are pretty shocking in humans, and I'm sorry to talk, you tune in this to learn something about horses, and I'm hitting you with metabolic syndrome in humans. But metabolic syndrome is still metabolic syndrome. It doesn't matter really which animal we're talking about. Humans, horses, dogs, it doesn't really matter. When you talk about metabolism, even though we eat things that are different, how they are processed, that's virtually all the same. So Bill Maher is talking about fat acceptance. And we do that with our horses. I hear this all the time. Well, he's a hunter. I don't want him thin. I want him to look good. I want to have that extra poundage. Or a halter horse that wants to look fat, and I get it. And in Bill Maher's little deal is called New Rule Fat Acceptance from Real Time with Bill Maher on HBO. He asks one simple question. Have you ever seen a fat 90-year-old? And there's a long pause, and then everyone just starts laughing. Because if you put your mind to it, most 90-year-olds are usually thin. And they're thin because the fat ones have died soon, because longevity is directly correlated with metabolic syndrome. And you know, in this world of the horse's advocate, my whole premise is to help horses thrive in a human world. And that's what I want for your horse. And if your horse is overweight, then he or she's going to be unhealthy. He's going to either break down with some sort of lameness or is going to become ill. And we've discussed this a million times. But it was really funny because he talks about some guy who said that the facts are being changed to fit the theory. And that's one of my favorite quotes from Sherlock Holmes. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle wrote in his book, Bohemians, I think it was called, The Tales of Bohemia. And that's a classic Sherlock Holmes, where he says it's a capital mistake to change facts to fit theories instead of theories to fit facts. And I've quoted this. It's been in my blogs, and I see it everywhere. People will change facts to fit theories. We'll start to say, well, we like our horses fat. We like to feed them grain. We like to add all these supplements. And in reality, our horses are becoming more lame. They're breaking down with suspensory ligament diseases or injuries. I'm seeing, I don't know, half a dozen to a dozen different diseases that weren't in the textbooks in the 1980s. And for a lot of you who've listened to me, you've probably heard me say this over, repeatedly. But suspensory ligament disease was just a minor thing back in the 1980s when I went to Cornell Vet School. And now it seems like every horse that I see has had a suspensory ligament injury or is, recovering from one. So I'm not too sure why that's happening. And that's really what got me started on this whole path of what's wrong with our horses. Why are they starting to become so unhealthy? So that's one of them. The second was fractured cheek teeth. I see that all the time in my practice, and I'm not getting fractured. There was no indication that horses had fractured cheek teeth in all the textbooks. And I was looking. I was just a nerd. I just loved reading about horses long before I got into vet school, and certainly throughout vet school and after vet school. And nobody talked about fractured cheek teeth. But we do know that the microbiome of the mouth is very susceptible to diet and to medications that we're using. I was talking to my dentist as she's in my mouth, and I'm going, whoa, back to her. But she was fascinated that I knew something about the microbiome in the mouth. And she and I are going to have a long discussion, as she and I have another appointment at the end of this month to finish things up. But we're going to talk about the microbiome in the mouth. And I know Texas A&M many years ago found out that just one dose of Previcox in the horse's mouth wiped out a whole family of bacteria that's supposed to normally live in the mouth. Remember, your gut starts at your lips. So what's in your mouth is no different than, well, it is different, but it's part of the digestive system that goes down to your stomach and through your intestines and out the poop hole. So you have this family of bacteria. There's about 700 or 1,200 individual species of bacteria that live inside a healthy mouth of the horse and human. And when you eat more sugar, you're going to change the bacteria. Or if you take antibiotics, or if you take anti-inflammatories, all of those things, or mouthwash and toothpaste, they're all going to affect the normal microflora of your mouth. And that can set up decay. And this is why I think we're seeing so much decay in horses' teeth. We didn't have cavities. Maybe nobody was looking for them. I don't know. But now everyone sees them. they're visualizing them with scopes or with mirrors. They see them, they're measuring them, and they know that these things dig down deep into the tooth and finally, eventually, fracture the tooth off into these pieces. And why? Where did that come from? Is it the diet we're feeding them? I think so. But who's going to do the study that says, okay, we're going to take 1,000 horses and 500 no grain all their lives, and 500 we're just going to grain them all the time. And at, between 10 and 30 years of age, we're going to look for fractured cheek teeth. Well, if you know anything about science, that's just never going to happen. There are too many confounding variables, which means that these horses could be from different parts of the country. The grains that you're feeding are different. Maybe someone's sneaking treats in. There's all sorts of reasons why, if you have all these different variables, you could have some difficulties with the data. And in addition, 1,000 horses seems like a lot, but it's really not. It's an underpowered study. And we've talked about powers of studies before, and that we need thousands, like tens of thousands of animals to make the power of the study really good. Even 100,000 would be really good. And most studies in horses are 10 to 20 to 30 horses. Because nobody's got the money to actually do the correct studies. So most of the studies, scientific studies in horses, are suspect, in my book, in my mind. So let's see, what else? Drop fetlocks, the DSLD, where the fetlocks just drop to the ground, not in the textbooks in the 1980s. We have EOTRH, the demise of the incisors up front that are gone. When did that start? We didn't have that in the textbooks in the 1980s. You don't need any special diagnostic tools to see that, or DSLD. So, and there's more. Kissing spine, founder that we're seeing abundantly in horses. When back in the 70s and 80s, it was in fat ponies. Grass founder, let's see what else. Kissing spine, white line disease. Narcolepsy / sleep disorder in horses. I mean, there was evidence that some horses did this, but now it seems like a lot of horses are doing it. So, nephrosplenic ligament entrapments. We didn't have that. I mean, when I went into vet school, we knew about torsions. We knew about how to palpate the abdomen of a horse to feel for certain things. Twisted guts and gas-filled bowel. We could find these things, but nobody had ever diagnosed the absence of the pelvic flexure, and it was now lodged in between the abdominal wall and the kidney, and there's this big space. I mean, nobody had felt that, and then all of a sudden one day somebody felt it, and I presented a case to Cornell as a surgical colic, and the resident got so excited because he said, I think this is nephrosplenic ligament entrapment. So metabolic syndrome, insulin resistance, obesity, these are huge issues in all our horses, and we're constantly trying to fix it. And it was interesting because the lady I just saw who had broken her leg from her breast cancer, they had basically said, you're in big trouble, you need to take these medications, and she took them, and they just made her so sick that she opted not to take it. She talked to her family and she said, look, I'm not going to take these medications. I'm not going to be running from this disease. I'm instead going to embrace it, love on it, and trust my immune system and say, you know what? I'm just going to take care of things from the inside out. And it turns out that she's now so much happier, and her blood values are coming back, and the doctors are already like shaking their heads in disbelief. I mean, they say all your parameters are getting better and better every time we see you. And this is where we all fall into the problem of we want to keep treating. Our horse gets laminitis, so we bring our vet and our farrier in to treat that. But wouldn't it have been better to prevent that in the first place? Wouldn't it be better to prevent breast cancer in the first place, or any kind of cancer? Wouldn't it be better to prevent any disease at all? And the answers, of course, are yes. But we as medical doctors who are trained in, doctors of veterinary medicine, medical doctors, all the professionals are here to fix what's broken. And I've been preaching for years now that we have to start moving forward with prevention first. And that comes from what we eat. Now, I listened to another really brilliant podcast. It is Sean Stevenson. And instead, it wasn't his podcast. He was actually being interviewed by Louisa, who has a podcast from California, but she's Australian, that's on neuroscience, which is just, she's fascinating to listen to. She just talks about neurology. And so she's talking to him about the axis between the gut and the brain. So we have something called the vagus nerve, and the vagus nerve, we've always known, connects everything in the intestines and the abdomen with our brain. And we all were trained in vet school that the brain sends signals down the vagus nerve into the abdomen, and we cause things to occur. Well, now we understand that we had it all wrong. About 5% goes that way, and 95% goes from the gut up. So the gut is actually using nerve transmission to send information to the brain that we need certain things. But they've been able to prove that you can take the gut and keep it alive outside the animal. I mean, the animal, in essence, is dead. These are lab animals. And they can start expanding one end of the intestine, and the intestine will just start to do its peristaltic wave all on its own without any brain input at all. And so now we know that the vagus nerve is nerve transmissions from the gut up to the brain. Now, what was I going to say about this? Oh, I know. We're talking about the gut microbiome, and the gut microbiome are the bacteria in the gut. And there's trillions, I mean, literally trillions. We've got so much more cells in bacteria living in our bodies and on our bodies, in our armpits and in our scalp, and coming out of our lungs in the air that we breathe. We have more bacteria there than we actually have cells of our body. And this is just being confirmed left and right. I mean, it's not even open for debate. If this is something new and shocking to you, I can understand that, because most people think that a human is a single entity. But it turns out that a human and a horse and every animal and every plant, every living thing on the planet is a collection of bacteria, parasites, viruses, fungi, and human cells, all working together to keep our bodies healthy. And when we start to alter that relationship, we start to alter the health of the horse. See, I'm keeping it on the horse here for you, but it's all animals. An aside, well, what Sean Stevenson and Louisa was trying to say here is that if we start to make sure that our gut bacteria are healthy by feeding them correctly, the whole body's going to be on track. And Sean said something interesting that I've been saying here for a long time, and you probably have figured this out. But every cell in your body, if you reached into your body and plucked out a cell from your skin or your liver or your lungs or your brain, it doesn't matter. Just take the cell out and put it in front of you and look at it. There is no doubt that everything in that cell came from the food that we ate. I mean, I've told you over and over again, there's 6 things that go in our body. There's air and there's water. Okay, so that air is hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, carbon, and a bunch of other things. Water is hydrogen, oxygen. And then I said minerals, and that's your zinc and your manganese and your selenium and your calcium and your phosphorus and your potassium. So all the things that you would call salts and electrolytes and minerals, that's all there. That leaves 3 other categories, and that's fat, sugar, and proteins. And fat is carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Sugar is carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And protein is carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen, and some have sulfur in it. So those are the only things that come in. That's it. And if you take a look at that cell and take it apart and you look at the cell wall, it's going to be fat, which is carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. It's going to be water, which is hydrogen, oxygen. It's going to be vitamins, which is carbon, hydrogen, oxygen with a mineral. It's going to be an enzyme, which is carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen. It's going to be, if it's an immune cell, it's going to have immune functions, which is carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen. They're all proteins. I mean, that's it over and over and over and over again. With every cell in your body, it is basically a reflection of what you're feeding it. And if you start to feed an abundance of one food and not enough of the others, in other words, if you feed more sugar and not enough proteins, your body is desperately going to work with that to keep you alive. And when it doesn't, it's going to become ill. And that's what we're seeing in our horses and in our own human population. We have to start looking at the food that we're giving ourselves and our horses, and that's going to make a difference. So when we start feeding foods that horses have never had in its evolutionary life, never, they've never had a sack full of any grain given to them. They've had grain when they're passing through, when there's oats available in the middle of summer, but that's it. And then they don't the rest of the year. They have evolved to just have forage, just have plants on the ground. That's how they do it. And when we add other sugars, when we add other grains, other foods, that raw material, yes, they're putting it in there, and yes, they are digesting it and turning it into carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. But in that process, you're overwhelming the bacteria, you're overwhelming the system inside the body to change and adapt to that. And in that change and adaptation, they're doing the best job they can to keep you alive, but it's just not going to be as good. It's like putting bad fuel inside your car and hoping that it goes. Like if you've got a nice diesel truck and it hums and purrs with good diesel fuel, and you add just a few drops of water, your engine's going to start coughing and sputtering and die because it cannot run on water. So if you start adding certain foods into your body, it's going to sputter and it's going to fail prematurely. Same with our horses. How many of you have horses that are 18 to 24 years old? I picked that because they're multiples of 6. I'll tell you why at another time, but let's just pick 18 to 24 in that age group. How many of those are sound, don't have any disease, and are still athletic? And if you can't say that they are, you're in that group of horses that have got illness or unsoundness. And why do they have this illness or unsoundness? My premise is it's because for the first 18 years of the horse's life, you were feeding other foods. They may have that EOTRH where the front teeth are falling out, or fractured cheek teeth, or dropped fetlocks, or suspensories, or any one of a number of diseases, insulin resistance, Cushing's disease, metabolic syndrome, colics, and others. And we have to, now, you could be saying, well, what about these genetic diseases? What about these diseases that the horse is born with? Okay, move them off to the side. That's a whole different subject. We're just talking about the diseases secondary to what we're feeding these horses, which I say, and I don't have statistics for this, but upwards of 90% of the horses that veterinarians see on a regular basis, could they have been prevented? That's a big question. You know, anhydrosis. Yeah, we had some anhydrosis, which is non-sweating, but now a lot of horses have it. And almost every horse that gets off grain starts sweating. It's just that simple. In 3 or 4 days, they just start sweating. I had one client who said, I had my horse on that no grain diet for 5 years, and my horse still wouldn't sweat. And I said, well, why didn't you contact me and we talk about this? And there was no great answer. I don't know why. I mean, maybe the horse was getting sweets or something. But then we look at hay. And here, one of the things that's really tough for people to understand is hay is only about 60 years old. I mean, yes, we've been cutting hay longer than that. But as far as baling it and putting on a truck and getting it to your farm delivered and stacked, That's probably 40 years. All right. So 40 to 60 years ago, hardly anybody had a baling machine, and we didn't have interstate systems and roads to bring hay. And what's wrong with hays? Well, hay has been modified through breeding of hays. So the hay is now higher in sugar content because when you feed this to cattle, or to cows specifically, the cows can produce more milk with a higher sugar content. So now we're putting our horses on this high sugar grass and pasture and hays, and now we have horses having more and more problems because they're eating more sugar. Now, it seems pretty easy. We all can just jump up from this podcast and yell, "It's the sugar that's causing the problem." But you have to look harder. It's not just excess sugar above the needs of the horse, because the only way you can put body fat on is eat more sugar than you need in a day. I've gone over this in other podcasts. You come to the Horses Advocate, visit me there, go through the forums that we've got on there and the discussions that we've got on how sugar is converted into body fat. But that is the only way you can get body fat, is you eat more sugar than your body needs in a day. It triggers insulin. And the other way, of course, is to have stress, which everybody has these days, because we're all watching the news and we're either, freaked out over a pandemic or politics or, finances, and all that stress just adds body fat. And I get that. I mean, that's just one of those things that we're all having to suffer through. But the bottom line is, we're delivering more sugar than we need in a day. And that's coming in our hay. So when we were feeding hay 24/7 and we're buying this line that somebody said that horses need to have hay in front of them 24/7 or they're going to get gastric ulcers, I just say, show me the proof. Show me the study that shows me that a horse that has hay withheld for 12 hours or grass or forage for 12 hours is going to have a higher rate of gastric ulcers. And it's just not going to happen. And, we all buy into these things, these lines, these things that come down the pike of catchy words like you got to feed a horse 24/7. There's just no proof of that. And I'm finding that horses that are not fed between 7 p.m. and 7 a.m., they're given a flake of hay, and then they're allowed to eat that hay and just sleep. The next day, they're not food aggressive because they're getting soybean meal, which brings me to my other point. It's not just excess sugar that's being fed, but it's not enough protein that's being fed. So they're not feeling satiated. So these horses are banging the stall door and showing what I call food aggression. They'll knock you over to get to whatever you're bringing into the stall. But as you add the protein to start to satiate their protein needs, the high quality protein needs, the proteins that have all the amino acids, then these horses start to become calm. So you walk into the barn and they're like, hi, how are you? But they're not banging the door. They're not like saying, oh my God, where have you been? And they start biting at the stall, at the horse next to them, get away, it's my food that's coming, it's my food, I'm first. All that stuff, that food aggression, that tends to just disappear. And the horses become calm, which is just all secondary to being fed excess glucose and some of these inflammatory ingredients. And that's a third thing. Inflammation in the gut, most people will agree between 60 and 90%, it depends on who you listen to. Let's just pick a number. 70% of all inflammation is occurring in the gut because we're constantly putting foods in there that are inflaming the gut. If you find the food that doesn't inflame your guts are happy. But as soon as you eat that thing that you taste great, but you shouldn't have eaten it, you're going to have bloat, you're going to have gas, you're going to have diarrhea, you're going to have all that thing. Well, that gut wall is screaming. It's trying to keep everything outside of your body because it's inflammatory. And I talk about lectins, lectins being these proteins that are in the seeds and the outer hulls that Dr. Gundry's talked about, and others have talked about lectins. And there's more than just the lectins, but that's a good one to focus on. These things are causing inflammation in the gut lining. So we want to make sure that inflammation is reduced, and you do that by removing the inflammatory ingredients, which is just about everything you stick in the horse's mouth. Look at some of the blogs that I've written about reading the ingredients of what's in your supplements, of your balancers. That's a good one. Just read what's in the balancers, and almost all of it is either inflammatory ingredients followed by alfalfa meal or soybean meal. And alfalfa meal and soybean meal is great, but why not just feed those two? They don't need vitamins. Almost all the vitamins are made by the gut bacteria. And if the gut bacteria are right, you're not going to get a vitamin deficiency. If they're out getting their sun, they're not going to get vitamin D deficiency. So just make sure they have a good gut bacteria for that. And the minerals are going to come from the water if it's coming from the ground. If you feed bottled water, maybe you'll get a mineral deficiency. The groundwater and plants have all the minerals they need. And there's a whole ecosystem of chelation that helps balance that thing out so they don't get excess minerals and excess iron. So I've covered a lot of things in this, just dumping on you all the ideas that we covered the Horse's Advocate. And it was stemmed from Bill Maher and all the other podcasts that I've been listening to that are explaining to us why obesity is killing our nation and, quite frankly, harming our horses. And all of us still want to go out there and believe that food equals love, and it doesn't. And I've been saying that food does not equal love long before Dr. Phil started saying it. But that's okay. We'll give him the credit. I really don't care. But if you think feeding your horse equates to your horse connecting with you and creating a relationship, you need to reevaluate that. I know that my wife 45 years ago fed me homemade meatballs and spaghetti, and that solidified a relationship. So I understand that food does equal love. It does equal a lot of things. I get that relationship. But if she really loved me, she would have said, here's your gun, go out and hunt. And if you don't, or your fishing rod, whatever, and if you don't catch anything, you ain't eating at my place, and it's wintertime, and good luck with that. I'll see you in a couple of weeks. And right now we can get food 24/7, 365. It's, a great book is called The Comfort Crisis. It's a really good book. The Comfort Crisis talks about a fellow who goes up with some guides to above the Arctic Circle in Alaska to hunt caribou, and the suffering he had to go through, and his reflection back on how much comfort we have as human beings from running water. By the way, my son who lives in Indonesia, he's standing at my kitchen sink and he says, you have no idea just how amazing it is that I'm throwing this valve here and I've got hot water coming out of the sink. He says that just isn't in Indonesia, or at least where he's at, or in Thailand, because he's been in Thailand a lot. They just don't think of having hot water heaters and having hot water plumbed into the house. So we have that. We have toilets. I mean, if you think back in the 40s, most people had outhouses. We didn't have indoor plumbing. I mean, you do the math. The 1940s, 1950s is only 70 to 80 years ago. That before that, you were going outside in the dead of winter or the rain to do your business. I'm sitting here at a charger, getting electricity, charging this car, and I'm just running up and down the road with hardly any resistance. And I'm looking over there, and there's 12, 2, 4, 6, 8 huge fuel tanks for a fuel service. And then there's a whole thing over there that has gasoline just for boats and diesel trucks. And over here, there's an Arby's and a mobile station with all the gas and the food that you want, all right here. I mean, it's so simple. I just have to go in there. I can get an Arby's sandwich. I can get a soda pop. I can get, a candy bar and not worry about it, because I can go down the road and get it again. If I accidentally spill it and it disappears, no big deal. I can get it tomorrow, right down the road. That's what we're talking about, the comfort. And we have the same idea of comfort to our horses. And evolution does not favor the comfort. And this is why our obese epidemic is are people and horses who are doing exactly what they're supposed to be doing. And they talk about fat shaming. I don't. I go up to a fat person or a fat horse and say, congratulations, you're doing exactly what you're telling your body to do. It's very efficient. And they look at me and they're like, I don't get it. And I say, well, you're taking that excess sugar and you're storing it for later, for that day when you don't have any more food. And when that happens, you're going to survive and the thin person isn't. It's that simple. The problem is tomorrow and the next day and at Christmas and the year after, we're going to have all these foods delivered by Amazon and put in our front door. So it's the availability of all this stuff that we have to just stop and say, okay, we have to start feeding our horses the way evolution said it should be done. And Bill Maher's correct. You don't change the facts to fit the theories. You don't say, okay, obesity is good. Obesity is something that we should embrace because it's not looking at it. We're changing the facts, and the facts are excess body weight, whether it's in your horse or yourself or anybody, is going to cause inflammation and cause disease. And I'll go over this a million times if you want me to. I'm also on a mission myself, even though my son came back and has fed me well because he's a chef. And boy, can he cook. Oh my goodness, can he cook. I mean, it's amazing. But he's honoring the fact that I don't want to eat much sugar. Even so, I've gained a couple of pounds. But I've gotten from about 230, 228 pounds. If you knew me a year or so ago, I'm down to 205 to 210. I'd say 207, which is where I am. My goal is to be 200 by Christmas or New Year's, or right around 200. And that means I've lost that body fat. And then my waist circumference is going to be under that 37 inches. And then I'm not going to be metabolically unfit anymore. And then I can prove to all of you guys that I'm walking the walk, not just talking the talk. So that's what I want to do here. I'm laying it out on the line. I want to do the best for our horses. I want our horses to thrive in a human world. I want all of you to come over to the Horses Advocate, please, and check that out. Subscribe to this. This is the best thing that you can do. If you like my messaging, if you want to have other people get this out, subscribe, because the more people who subscribe and leave comments, the better off this message will get out there. So leave your comments. Tell me if I'm on the right track. Tell me your thoughts. And let me know what other subjects you want me to talk about. Again, I sincerely hope that you'll accept my apology for taking a couple of weeks off here. I want to get back on track and do some things and make sure that we cover a lot of topics here. So let me know what you want me to hear, what you want to hear from me. Anyway, I got to go. My charging's done. I've got another appointment up ahead, so I'm out of here. Thank you for stopping here and being with me for the past 40 minutes. Take care, y'all. Doc T out. Hey, everyone. Doc T here. Thank you for listening to my content. Would you do me a huge favor? Would you please subscribe, comment, like, thumbs up, and give a star review? However it's presented to you, I want you to do that. There's two reasons. The first, of course, is to improve this product. This way I know what you like, what you don't like, what I can improve upon, what topics you want me to cover. But more importantly, it's also going to help others find me. And by doing that, you are now engaged in this mission of helping horses thrive in a human world. By you helping, we can reach others. And that I would be so grateful for. And remember, go to thehorsesadvocate.com for updates on this information. Thehorsesadvocate.com. And again, thank you so much for being here. Doc T out.